Hi, I'm Smeester. Welcome back to Smeester's Corner. All right, so today's topic is bias and how bias affects your thinking. There's been a lot of discussion around this, but I'm going to go over like the straight kind of scientific evidence for bias. Everybody has a bias or a way of viewing the world. There's a way that they think the world works or should work. That's the bias. You could have multiple biases. There's not just like one big bias in your life that's the problem. You probably have multiple biases. Your bias is informed by your pathology, and your pathology is the way in which your brain operates. Your decisions and your behaviors are based on these pathological functions. These are called neuropathways. If you get entrenched into a particular neural pathway, there are some decisions that seem like decisions, but really aren't decisions. So for example, that could be the threats that you think around in the world, the types of people that you're attracted to, etc. The point is, you can get stuck behaving and thinking in a certain way, okay, which are these kind of neural pathways. And so what we want to do is be able to identify these patterns that we've created for ourselves. It will cause you to see life in a certain, some people call them lenses. So I'll read some off as an example of certain lenses the way in which you view the world, or the lens through which you view the world. You could have a conservative or liberal lens. You could have a lens and you look at life through either liberty or power structures. Racial lenses, class lenses, individualistic lenses, a collectivist lens, a gender lens, a victim lens, a religious lens, a fairness or care lens, a loyalty lens. There's all these different lenses. I'm not going to say which one's better than the other. They just are there. Based on these lenses, you've conditioned yourself to view the world a certain way. And then you go out and look for evidence that the world is that way, and you find it. So basically, whatever you want to see the world as, you're going to find it. For example, thinking that no one likes you. If you think that, you're probably going to find evidence for that somewhere. You'll see people whispering and think it's about you and just come to the conclusion that no one likes me. If you have more of a victim mentality and you think that everyone's wronged you, you're going to go find evidence for that, and then that's going to confirm your bias towards that. So whatever you're looking for, you're going to find it. And you may be accurate about that assessment, or you may be wrong about that assessment, but everyone feels like they're correct. This leads us to the idea of Occam's razor, because the world is a very complicated place. And it's really difficult to figure out the way in which the world actually works. So what people do is, Occam's razor says, people will find the most simplistic version or story of the way the world works and then just go with that because it's easy. It's easy to kind of deconstruct the world through whatever that simplistic lens. And Occam's razor also says that people are quick to attribute the worst of intentions to other people because it's easy. So it's easy to see what somebody does, and then you just jump to a conclusion and say, oh, that person must be this kind of guy, when you don't even know that person. So now I'm going to go through different types of biases. So the first one is called confirmation bias. Okay, a lot of people know about this one. This is when you think something is true, so you'll go out and find evidence that it is true, and then that just confirms your bias that it is true. And you're not looking for evidence that it's not true. So that's just called confirmation bias. Everybody does it. There have been studies on people, and it's interesting because the more information they present to someone and the more evidence they present to someone about why they might be wrong, people tend to dig their heels in even harder and insist they're right when more and more evidence points to the fact that they're wrong, which is interesting. That's confirmation bias. And smart people can fall for this just as easily as everybody else. The second kind of bias is called motivated reasoning. So this is basically like in-group acceptance. So there's a certain group. You want to be accepted by that group. You want to be in with that group. Or you just need a group to fit into. And so you're motivated to think like them. It's motivated reasoning. There's a motivation why you think the world works in this particular way. The third one is called negative threat bias. So this one is based on your sensitivity to threats. evolutionarily, back in the day, we needed to be sensitive to threats to survive. It's better to assume that there's a predator in those bushes so I don't go over there. It's safer to assume that and not go over there and be wrong than it is to just assume that there's not, go over there and be wrong, and then the predator attacks you. The thing is now, we don't have the threats that we used to have, but we still try to find them just as judiciously. The thing is now, we don't have the threats that we used to have. The threats now in society are a lot lower, but our minds are still wired to see threats. So we still go out there trying to find all the threats we can find, and we reason and we react to them like they're just as bad. This can also shape the way in which we see the world. We are fast to see that which we fear most. So maybe you're fast to see racism and bigotry, moral corruption, loss of freedom, and then you just start seeing it everywhere because you're motivated to see that. And then that confirms you're right. The fourth way bias affects us, which is also motivated reasoning, is how it makes you feel about yourself. What does this belief say about me? So a lot of times people run through this scenario. Would a good person believe this? Yes. Well, I'm a good person, therefore I should believe this. The point is, with all this, you need to know how you're being influenced by yourself. So you're influencing yourself. There's this famous experiment, you can look it up on YouTube, it's called the gorilla experiment. And so they told all these participants, they had a video, and they said, watch the video. It's a basketball court with people passing around this basketball, and they had to count the different passes, and the ball moves pretty quick. So they go through the whole experiment, they count the passes, they ask people how many passes each person had, and then they say, oh yeah, well, did you see the big gorilla? And people were like, what? There's a gorilla? And yeah, in the middle of the whole scene, a guy in a gorilla suit comes out and walks out in the middle of the court, dances around, and then walks back out. And the people were so focused on the passes that they didn't even see the gorilla. So that just shows you, if you're looking for something, you're probably missing a bunch of other things. So whatever bias is affecting you, it's probably keeping you from seeing the other big picture if you zoom out a little bit and stop looking for those little things. The fifth bias is called availability bias. So question, do you think politicians or doctors and lawyers have more affairs? I'm guessing a lot of people would go with politicians, but it's not the case. Here's why. It's an availability bias. An availability bias is the stories that you've been exposed to construct how available the thought comes to you. So it's the availability of the thought. Have you seen a lot of stories about politicians having affairs? Yes. So that's the one that comes to mind because you've been exposed to those more, but it doesn't necessarily make it more true. So here's another definition. Judging the frequency of an event or possibility of an event by the ease at which it comes to mind. So if it comes to mind easily because you've been exposed to those types of stories, you're going to think that that's the truth. Then that can lead to an availability cascade. If the frequency of the story you're told is high, and it's very important, then societally it can cause an availability cascade. So everybody starts, it can cause like social panics because people think that something's happening very frequently. It's very important, so people start to react to it. But this is also called casual thinking. And it's a system one thinking, which means it's just kind of lazy thinking. But we've all been exposed to this within the last few years, societally. Then there's something called hindsight bias. It's looking back at your decisions and judging whether or not those decisions were a good decision based on the outcome. Did it have a good outcome? Well, it must have been a good decision. Did it have a bad outcome? Well, it must have been a bad decision. Sometimes it was a good decision, it just didn't turn out very well. So for example, people might have had bias in the O.J. Simpson trial. Well, we saw that how it turned out, so then people will revise what their biases were to fit that outcome. The last bias, number 7, is data versus narrative. So there's data out there and then there's narratives out there. A lot of times they don't match up. What we think we do is collect all this different data and then make a narrative or a story about how the world works based on that data. But that's not how it works. Usually it's a availability bias or a confirmation bias, and you're looking to see the world in a certain way because you feel that way. It's based on feelings, and then you go get data to support that. The problem is with the narratives are usually overly simplistic. That's what they're constructed to do. Narratives are constructed to give you a simplified version of the world so it's not so complicated, so you can see your way through problems. Then what happens is you hear those narratives repeated by other people in your group, or you hear them repeated on the news or wherever, and then that's just further evidence that your narrative is true. So that just confirms what you've already believed, and you're not actually going out and picking through the data. It's just easier to believe that the world is that way. And you might have make some friends doing it, and people might pat you on the back because you're also saying or signaling, I also believe this narrative. So it's motivated reasoning as well. So the point of all this is to know how your biases affect your view of the world, and to kind of check in with yourself and say, all right, is this motivated reasoning? Is this what I'm doing? It's easy to point out how other people are doing it. It's really hard to figure out how we're doing it. The last thing I'll say about this in this video is that there's two things that you should be comfortable with saying. I don't know, and I might be wrong. People don't want to say I don't know, because in the age of social media, we're judged on our beliefs because there's less face-to-face interaction. So you're not judged based on your character because people don't really know your character. All they get is a sanitized version of you, so they get your opinions. So everybody is motivated to have an opinion about everything. And everybody is actually really scared of saying, I don't know, because then it may mean that you don't know, and maybe that makes you feel unintelligent or something. But it's okay to say, I don't know. That's a humble thing to do. It's also okay to say, I might be wrong. You may think you're right, but you should be open to the possibility that you may be wrong, because no one is right on 100% of the issues. That's insane to think that you're right on every single issue. The more you do that, the more open-minded you will be, and the more knowledgeable you will become. You will be less ignorant. So I hope this helps. Thanks for watching.